But I see Dominic is here, so I'll give the floor to Chris, and we can start our Q&A. So
Yeah, so just wanted to take a second to welcome Dominic Carbonaro. Is that correct? Awesome. Happy to have you here. This is many months in the making. We've actually been kind of talking back and forth. I remember the last time we talked was right before AVAX Summit went for you guys when you went to Barcelona. So welcome aboard to the call here. Got a lovely audience here for you, Dominic. If you give us a little bit of background on who you are, what you do at Avalanche, and how you got into DeFi. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Dominic Carbonaro. I'll give you just a real quick background of like myself and my professional career before I got into crypto. So I got started in educational technologies or publishing, and I worked for a few publishers, kind of bounced around before, I guess, taking the leap into doing crypto full time. It was really around COVID. A lot of my job was to be on college campuses and meeting with professors, and I don't think I have to tell anyone about how receptive people were to meetings in March and April of 2020. And so I had a lot of time at home, and I kind of just always liked to do things. So I really started getting into crypto. I started, I went back to school, started running a validator in the Avalanche network. In September of 2020, I kind of self-taught myself that. So, and then kind of just, stuck with it. And since then, moved around a lot of the ecosystems as a user first. So I started in DeFi, was doing a lot of like on-chain DeFi stuff. And then in January of 2022, kind of noticed that the on-chain DeFi stuff was getting significantly harder. Yields were getting worse. It was becoming more competitive, a lot faster in terms of like buying and selling. And so I pivoted a lot to NFTs and did pretty well there. And then from there, got a job at Avalanche as the head of NFTs, art, and culture for business development in June of 2022. So I've been here for a little over a year and a half. But have a pretty good breadth of knowledge of just like the broader crypto ecosystems as a participant, as like a market participant first. So have a kind of good, I guess I get to see both sides of the coin, right? So both for users and like working at a layer one.
That's awesome. I didn't know that you had run a validator. That's a really interesting that's an interesting proposition. I just out of curiosity before we move on, how difficult is that? And B, are you still running a validator for AVAX?
Yeah, so Avalanche mainnet went live in I think September of 2022, September of 2020. I think I started validating like a week or two after. So at the time, I was a communication studies major, so I have no technical background. And so while I was working full time, I went back to college. I went to a community college, and I got certified in networking plus. I got certified in security plus, and I got certified in intro level AWS. So I could do all of the infrastructure for it and host it in AWS, and I could secure it. But the hard part was Linux. That was really hard. That was a lot of sleepless nights, waking up at like 2 a.m. I think I got it running over, not getting it, going back to bed. So that was the hard part. I was lucky enough to have, I mean, like even my professors who were teaching Linux couldn't help me. So I was lucky enough to like meet someone in crypto that was like, probably could have taken all my money, but didn't, and was lucky enough to like really help me on the Linux stuff. Now it's significantly easier. I mean, God, you can use a managed service provider like Allnodes. They'll run the whole infrastructure for you. You just have to put the Avalanche up and pay them the fee. You can actually just liquid stake on chain, which gives you the same yield through like GoGo Pool or Benki. So like, it's way different now, right?
Yeah.
But like that, in 2020, this concept of like, I didn't even know what a blockchain was when I was valid. I didn't know what a validator was. I just knew it got yield. And I was like, well, I like these things and I can get a yield on it. I didn't know I was validating blocks. I didn't know what a wallet was. I didn't get on chain until March of 2021. So I was validating the Avalanche network for, 6 or 7 months and I had no idea what I was doing. But kind of this, I guess that's how I've always worked, right? Just go head first and fail and figure it out as you go, and you come out on the other side and you learn some stuff.
Our origin stories for the four of us as founders is very similar. So I can completely understand that. Just to kind of peel back the curtain, I think a lot of people are curious. What's it like to work at a blockchain company?
It's very fun. it's crypto is a very fast market. So I think working at a blockchain company is very fun if you constantly like to do like new things. There's no real rhythm or pattern and like in your work, right? So like what I mean by that is like you're never working on the same things for like a very long time. Like at a high level you are, but the themes and the narratives are always constantly changing. So you have to really be like plugged in. And like, for me, like it really depends on the role you work. I work in business development, but it's a little more than that. So like I have to do a lot of like the on-chain strategy. So like how do you grow that specific vertical in the ecosystem? How do you get users? So like it's a little bit more of like you have to theory craft like incentive structures. So it's creative in that way. And I would also say it's very much a relationship, you know. I'm luckily I'm engaged with no kids. I would think it'd be very hard to do my job if you had kids because you have to. It's like I have 3 different ways of communication, whether it's Twitter, Telegram, or Signal, and they're constantly being, and you have to be like plugged in, right? So that's what I mean. There's no like real escape, and I think that's probably relatively true for any of like top performer in any job you're doing. Like it's always kind of hard to put it down, but like this one much more so in that like you know the work is much like the users, and the users are 24/7 plugged in, so you got to be 24/7 plugged in. And another thing I would say that's unique that I've had to deal with recently is your work is much more publicly criticized than it is at a different type of job. And what I mean by that is like if you remember, like I think examples of this on like much larger scales are like either athletes when they play games and they do poorly and they have to go to social media and hear people like talk poorly about them. Whether it's, if you guys remember, like when Bud Light did their whole campaign and that one person that did it got like basic. So like very rarely do you see people in like regular day life, their work put on display. But anything I do initiative wise is put on display, and there's a group of people on Twitter that are going to critique and either love and praise you or absolutely tear you down. And you have to like be able to deal with that. You have to be able to deal with that. And if you're not good with dealing with like pressure like that, it can get. I've seen it get to people, and they're not in the industry anymore. So yeah, it's unique. To put it lightly.
Yeah,
I can probably, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so you mentioned that your initiatives are put on display, that you're theory crafting incentive structures. Can you describe at a high level, like what is the nature of your work and what sort of outcomes and goals are you and your team working for within the ecosystem?
That's a good question. So this is also what I said, working crypto stuff. It's like those goalposts can change. You can design something and start doing it, and then 2 weeks into it, those KPIs per se will be completely different, and now you got to pivot. So, last year it was really all about like we wanted to get brand relationships and grow like brand partnerships, and so we created something that we thought would help with that. And then around February, then the program went live in January, and then in February it became volume. So you have to go out and get volumes and metrics. I'm like, well, this is not designed for that. So then it's like, okay, now you have to stop that and totally pivot what you're doing into something new, and then create like a new incentive structure for that. And like all the while you have people externally critiquing those things. And like, it can be tough to manage because like some critique is valid, some critique is just people who are crypto degens that want to make money and they're not making money right now, so they need someone to be angry at, right? So it's like it can be tough to balance and filter those things. But yeah, so it's an interesting time, Did that answer everything? I want to make sure. Do you want to learn?
No, yeah, that was
talk about one of the systems I made.
That was perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Actually, I have it. It's on the question list actually. But what I did want to talk about was kind of the part of the hype we had for this talk with you, Dominic. So I full disclosure, Jangle and I have been Avalanche users since before the rush, back in 2021. No, 2020. Yeah. So ultimately, I'm famous for having a ridiculously large bag of AVAX NFTs, and I get lovingly criticized for it at times, but whatever. It's been a year for Avalanche for sure. looking at price action, looking at a lot of the things that have happened, always building, in my opinion. So really, really impressive to see the subnet partnerships and whatnot. Avalanche, along with Solana, two Altel ones that are in a seriously big hot conversation with the rise of BTC and ETH over the last 30 to 60 days. In the case of AVAX, what do you think has been the biggest catalyst to that rise over the last 30 days?
I think being in my position is unique because not only do we get to work with crypto people and crypto builders. I got to move out of light here. Got to position myself so the sun's not got the worst thing. And that we also get to talk to whether it's venture capital, people who are quote unquote thought leaders, right? And I think the general consensus 6 to 8 months ago was that alternative layer ones are dead. It was going to be Ethereum. It was going to be Ethereum layer twos, and really nothing outside of that would happen. Solana was only propped up because of scam money by Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. Avalanche only worked because Suzu was a crook and he was illegally doing. So I think these narratives persisted. And the interesting thing about dealing with people, especially in the venture capital side, is there's very much of a think tank and like a bubble, right? So once one person starts saying it, they all start saying it, and they all start perpetuating these ideas. But I think if you zoom out and look, that's not necessarily the case. And I think people are kind of starting to realize that the concepts that have been ingrained really deeply into the psyche of a crypto user are not necessarily true. And what I mean by that is if you look back at how crypto evolved, I always like to say the coins are very much representation of human evolution, right? You had Bitcoin, which was really the Neanderthal period. It was brand new. No one really knew what this stuff was. All you can do is send it back and forth to each other. And the way you survive the world at that time and not get rugged and scammed on things like BitConnect or buying into these forks for block size wars, right, was to be very much like a primitive human and Bitcoin only, everything bad, right? That's kind of the way you survive because it's the easiest way to interpret the world around you, because at the time that wasn't a very sophisticated market, right? And so if you just thought everything else is bad, Bitcoin only good, you wouldn't lose your Bitcoin and therefore you would make money. And it worked. And so what I mean by that is I think some of those things are very much ingrained in the psyche of crypto. Just like you see some Great Depression scarring and maybe your grandparents who tell you, you gotta do that. It's they went through what it was like to not eat, right? So that scarring takes sometimes generations to get. I think it's the same thing in crypto. So you had people on the Ethereum side who had to fight really, really hard against Bitcoin as being Bitcoin only. Everything that was the conversation, right? Anything that happens on Ethereum will just eventually make its way to Bitcoin. You don't have to worry about it. Ethereum's a scam. Well, I found that that's not true. Smart contracts are really great. You can build amazing applications based off this stuff. And so, but with that, I think that community absorbed a lot of that scarring and that only Ethereum, right? But I think what you're kind of starting to see is that, hey, that's not necessarily true. And that's probably not how it's going to look. And if you look at the history of tech adoption, that's never how it looks. It's not just one provider. It's not just one player that owns the entire market, right? So I think people are starting to slowly wake up to that, hey, look, there might be other ecosystems. And I think what you saw is a lot of those thought leaders or a lot of those people in that bubble are caught off guard. And they're mostly off sides because they were heavily underallocated or not paying attention to these ecosystems. And now they have to take a serious look. These ecosystems have users and they have people and they buy the token and they're a part of a broader culture. And you can't ignore that. And so I think with things like Solana and Avalanche specifically, those two seem to be kind of leading the way for alternative layer ones. We're seeing interesting things pop up, even in the Cosmos ecosystem with data availability for Celestia. Now there's this whole argument, does that actually take away from the value proposition of settling to ETH layer ones? There's all these complex conversations happening now. And I think people are starting to realize that the world in which we interpreted it 10 years ago is not how it's looking now. And maybe we should start to pay attention to other things, right? So I think that's kind of why you're seeing these narratives start to pick up. But I'm excited. I think it's a good thing. I think competition and different ecosystems are a positive thing. They push and force innovation, and it's better to let people explore and do things and try than say only me, and if you go anywhere else, therefore you're speaking out against
some of these really difficult like interconnectivity issues really early on, and now they're sort of seeing the fruits of that labor in all these different app chains. Where do you see Avalanche fitting into this? What is the difference in approach that makes the Avalanche ecosystem compelling to you?
Yeah, so I think you're very, very close to how I view the market. So, and I'm going to write a piece on this relatively soon. And I think this is why you're seeing now like the shift in mindshare, because I think when you look at the market from there's like three really ways to look at it: as a participant, as a builder and developer, and as a capital allocator. And a lot of the times, the capital allocators can determine the first two. Right. And I think what you saw is a lot of people as capital allocators were very allocated to Ethereum and very allocated to Ethereum and rollups only. And I think what you're seeing emerge is really there's three buckets. There's blockchains that scale via rollups, where Ethereum is the leader. There's blockchains that just scale at the base layer only, where Solana is the leader, but you have things like Aptos, Sui, Thay, right? So they're in that bucket. Then you have blockchains that scale horizontally. So they scale via app chains or subnets, where you have Avalanche, Cosmos. And I think what you're going to see is that responsible capital allocators have to say, okay, I don't know what the most like proficient way to scale a blockchain is, but I know there's three unique approaches, and I know all three are working on something that is actually interesting, right? And it's not just a scam. And so it's like prudent of you as an investor to say, I'm going to diversify risk and allocate more evenly across the board, because one could win, or maybe all three win, and they specialize in different things, right? So I think you're kind of seeing that emerge. And that's why I think you're seeing these narratives play out, is like Ethereum really is the leader in blockchains that scale their rollups. Solana is really right now the leader in blockchains that just scale at the base layer. And Avalanche is the leader in blockchains that scale horizontally or via app chains or via subnets. And so I think that's just going to continue to play out. That's my best guess on like how I view the market and where I think we sit. And I think it's a good thing because we can actually lead in something.
Yeah, as far as blockchains that scale horizontally, do you so kind of two questions. Do you put Cosmos in that and the Cosmos ecosystem in that bucket? And then in my eyes, the key issue that has prevented the Atom token from really being investable as a capital allocator is that by scaling horizontally without one key asset connecting all of these different ecosystems, you're not really creating cohesive value accrual to any one investable asset. You have different things, Celestia or DYDX, that could be using this architecture and capture some value. How does Avalanche address that issue? And is the AVAX token going to be able to achieve that sort of asset singularity that ETH has achieved in its ecosystem, but that Atom really has not yet achieved in the IBC and the Cosmos ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. To be honest, I've had this conversation with even our CEO, and he's like worried about how many tokens we have, that there's not enough. I think our cap is like 720 million. I'd honestly have to check again, but I'm just guessing somewhere in there, 800 million. And like right now, right, you need validators to validate a subnet. Those have requirements of Avalanche. I believe it's 2,000 Avalanche each, 8 validators a subnet. So you're looking at like 16,000 Avalanche. So you could technically do the math on how many validators you could potentially have across ever existing. And so there's pros and cons to that. A con being one, the hurdle to creating becomes much higher, right? So the higher the token goes, right? If I want to make a subnet, I now have to buy $16,000 worth of AVAX at $40, right? These are not easy ways to get in. So I think we're working on something. I believe there was an Avalanche community proposal, an ACP posted around a different type of subnet model. But I'll be honest with you, I know like the top priority of the platform team. I'm not sophisticated enough to answer that question, but I do understand what you're saying. But I do know it's like something that they're very much focused on. Patrick O'Grady, Aaron, Steven, all those guys.
Yeah, makes total sense.
So since we've been talking about this, there's a couple of questions, one from Satya and one from Kelly, specifically about subnets. So just kind of walking it back for anybody who's not familiar with Avalanche. Avalanche is made up of three basic zones, if you want to call them that, right? So you have your C chain, your X chain, your P chain. The C chain is the EVM compatible chain that most people see when they interact with, like, Benki or Trader Joe, or all the major protocols in Avalanche. If you could just kind of give a quick overview of how those all kind of talk to each other, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we have the C chain, the X chain, the P chain. C chain, like you mentioned, the EVM compatible chain. The P chain is the chain that's used for staking. So that's where you actually send your Avalanche to if you want to stake it to a subnet. And then the X chain is the exchange chain. Now, realistically, the C chain doesn't have to be the only chain that you interact with. So the X chain and the P chain are fixed, right? But the C chain is just the largest chain where most of the liquidity is. So right now, if you were to spin up a subnet, right, you would be forced to validate the seed chain. I believe, actually, so it might be optional, it might be forced. I have to look into it. I think we're moving to one of those models. But the cool thing about Avalanche is its real innovation is in its consensus mechanism. While other ones either use Nakamoto or classical, Avalanche uses its own form of consensus, which is why it can get finality down really fast to under 2 seconds. So you can technically spin up any virtual machine you want on top of Avalanche consensus. So if we wanted to create a Solana virtual machine, you could replicate Solana ecosystem on top of Avalanche as its own subnet, and it would work between the EVM chain and the Solana virtual machine chain. So they could talk to each other and do things together. That's what they're building out right now with Teleporter. And the ability to move tokens between subnets seamlessly. So I think the subnet infrastructure is like 6 months away from being so like just really easy to deploy and really easy to use. We've been working on it, for almost 2 years. I think that's, I know you made a point about Cosmos. I think IBC and a lot of their SDKs are really, really good. So it's very easy to build on. But I think Avalanche is really 6 months away from that. And so that's kind of how the ecosystem sits and works. You're right in that, yeah, the C chain is the chain you've used. It's the EVM compatible chain, but it's not the only one. And I think that's a little bit of a difference between what people, actually think, right? When you think of these other chains, it's kind of just one chain. Avalanche is a little different in that approach.
So Kelly has another question too. So with regards to the X chain, obviously you have different wallet addresses, but would DeFi users outside of using Core wallet, would you really use the X chain for anything besides just exchange, like swapping of assets?
No, you don't need to. Everything's done via the C chain now, and most exchanges have integrations. I think the DeFi innovation is going to come on things like Dex a lot, where they're a subnet that also calls back to the C chain, and you can use it without even knowing really you're using it, but the way it functions. And so I think DeFi users will much more be in that situation where they're using the C chain and using subnets at the same time, and they don't even really know they're using subnets. They're kind of just using products, right?
Yeah. And obviously not to really bring up competitors and whatnot, but when people think about subnets, they think a lot about Polygon supernets. They seem to be in the same conversation. Is there competition there? I mean, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think supernets, they're depreciating. I don't think they're doing supernets anymore. I don't think that's
okay.
I don't think that's a thing. I always ask people, it's very funny, is I can go spin up a subnet right now. You really can't host a supernet. They don't exist. It's more of just external. I think Polygon right now is focusing on their ZK EVM stack. Yeah, I don't see them pushing supernets anymore.
That's good to know.
And I always ask people, if you could show me a Polygon supernet in production, I would love to see it. I could point to you several subnets that are working active. I think it was in a response to subnets. If you want my just opinion as a user, I think it was in response to subnets, but I think they're now down the ZK EVM path.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot more sense based on their messaging. So, talking to you as a DeFi user, and again, we'll come back to what you do to Avalanche in just a minute. What would you say you're the most excited by with regards to projects or concepts like RWAs or liquid staking? Basically, leading into that, what do you think are the killer apps that are on chain right now for this group?
Absolutely. So I think GoGo Pool is fantastic. I think the way they have it set up via liquid staking, I think the value accrual back to GGP is really interesting too, in that it sells AVAX to buy GGP. I think in my opinion, that's like the one I've been most impressed with. I know Hubble, I think, is launching today. So that's a perps protocol. It's a native perps protocol in Avalanche. So I'm interested to see how that looks. Dexalot's pretty interesting too. I've had some pretty deep conversations around MEV and the trade-offs between CLOBs and AMMs. And I think the general consensus is if you can have a CLOB at a much faster rate, you can reduce MEV by like up to 90%. So I think, like, my gut tells me the big trend in the next year or two in DeFi is going to be switching away from AMMs and switching to CLOBs. And I think AMMs were only really popular because the EVM couldn't do CLOBs. But I think you're going to start to see more of those things come out. I just think order books function better than automated market makers. I just do. It's a CLOB is an order. Sorry, I just saw someone ask a question. It's just an order book. It's like an on-chain order book. So those are my interesting things for DeFi. What was the other question in there? Sorry, I want to make sure I get them all.
Oh, just wanted to make sure what you just feel what we talked about protocols you're excited by, but what do you think are the killer apps in crypto investing or in DeFi?
Killer apps in DeFi. That's a tough question. I think I'll be honest with you. As a user, I haven't seen much like innovation recently in DeFi. It seems like it's been a lot of the stuff that already existed, either reskinned or remarketed. But that's why I'm really focused on new products that couldn't exist in the old guard. And that's why I think order book style markets are going to be important, because like you just really couldn't do them on Ethereum, right? Another thing I saw that was interesting is even some of the stuff on like the Move virtual machine. They have ways in which they can prevent large scale hacks. So I'm interested to see how some of that stuff comes out. A lot of the Move based machines have made this statement that like it's impossible to get hacked on Move. To be honest, I haven't looked enough into it. We invested and are really close with a team that's going to be using our subnet infrastructure and movement, and they're a Move based virtual machine. So I'm kind of excited to work a little bit more with them and learn a little bit more about that. But I would say my killer app thesis right now is like is order book based markets.
Okay. And when you say Move, you're talking about Apto, Sui, those types of things,
Sui, right? Movement. I think Say might be Move. I don't know if they are or not. I'd have to look. But yeah, we'll see how they do.
Awesome.
And yes, I think Dexes will use the cloud model.
Well, they're starting to move that way, right? So, obviously Trader Joe is starting to inch that way. How closely do you guys work with Trader Joe, just out of curiosity?
Oh, super closely. I know the team super well. I really like their new product. Liquidity Book's a really good product, actually. But yeah, we work very, very closely with them.
So in a CLOB model, are there on-chain liquidity providers, or is it sort of like off-chain entities that are participating in market making? And is it probably a higher percentage of institutional liquidity providers versus like retail crypto native LPs?
Yeah, it's much more sophisticated. So I think like the concept of like, parking your capital in a pool too is not the same. I think what I've seen some things come out though is like, and I think what will happen is you'll have kind of sophisticated people who know how to market make in there, but they may not have the capital, right? And it might be like they can show strategies, and instead of like them going and working for like one of these people, they can post on an app, right? And you can fund a vault, and then they use that vault for a period of time to market make, and then you get a return on that. That's what I think. Like, I'm just completely making up theories here, but I think you'll see things like that emerge, because there's always people that are talented that don't have the capital, and there's always people with capital that don't have the talent. And usually those things always make a pretty good relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Is that the primary? So like when you think about this horizontal scaling model and the long-term vision of Avalanche, is that the primary killer application that comes to your mind is the ability to do central limit order books. Obviously, who knows what innovators will come up with when technological constraints are lifted. Is there anything else that you see as a really obvious things that are enabled and builders are ready to build that are enabled by this horizontal scaling model?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer two things here. I see some questions. One, we're not adding new tokens. Okay. It's not ever going to happen. That was a conversation around like when you're talking about token scarcity and it's like, wow, if you do the math, it's going to drive a lot of value. And then the second thing, I can't talk about price. So I work at Avalanche. I can't tell you why a price is moving. I can't have those conversations. So it's not, I just can't answer those questions. Back to what you said is around like subnets and central limit order books, right? Is that what you?
Yeah. So basically I'm trying to wrap my head around, okay, in a world where you have horizontal scaling, and sorry for I keep bringing back the parallels to Cosmos, is just what I'm trying to compare it to understand the landscape, right? Like if I want to build an application that has maximum compatibility with other applications and interoperability, like maybe I look at a monolithic architecture and I want to share liquidity across the whole ecosystem. Like maybe I look at something like Solana, right? If I want to have as little effort as possible in setting up the infrastructure and making sure the infrastructure is secure, maybe I just like launch on an L2 or something. And if I want to do X, I should launch a subnet, right? What are those key instances where somebody, a developer, a team is like, I should deploy on Avalanche or I should deploy on a subnet instead of a roll up or a monolithic approach like Solana? Yeah.
Yeah, there's pros and cons. Okay. I can start with some of the cons. So I'll just say it all. So on a layer two, if you're deploying on a layer two outright, you are beholden to the ecosystem. Like if you saw today, Arbitrum still hasn't worked, I think for like over an hour because they were spamming the network with ordinals and the sequencer ran out of gas. So transactions can't get posted down to the main chain. So you can't do anything. So like you run into those situations where inherently L2s are extremely centralized. So if you're okay with that, and that's a trade-off you want that, hey, you don't really have control over your infrastructure. These sequencers can run out of gas and you can't close positions or you just can't do anything. You know, that's an issue with L2s. The second issue is you're beholden to the token, and you're essentially paying rent to the layer two to inherit security. And so it can bring into question value accrual for your token, right? If you can't give revenue shares, because it's been very clearly stated that revenue shares based off of protocol are technically securities, right? What do you do? Well, your token only has governance or voting powers, and what you often find out is that more than 51% of the token is controlled by one VC. So, like, what are you actually voting on, right? Like, you can very clearly go look at some tokens and look how they're allocated, and you're like, the one entity has more than half the control. So, like, what do I actually get for this token, right? And so there can be issues or concerns there as a DeFi protocol, right? So, I think the advantages of subnet are one, it's a permissioned or permissionless network. So you have, the ability to have control or not control. You can control who actually validates your network. And secondly, you can set custom gas tokens. So in order to make that subnet work, in order to actually use it, you have to use a token, right? So I think this is a very compelling case to like certain games, certain DeFi protocols where like, if you want to do a swap, you have to use my token and use it as gas. And so I think there's, obviously some things that are good there. And I think you saw DYDX recently leave. I think it was ZK Sync, right? They left to go to Cosmos, and it was a big blow, right, to people who had this. They had this idea that that's where it's going to be, and it's like, no, I think app chains are actually really well suited for perps protocols, right? You can choose who the validators are. The validators actually get to confirm these transactions. You can in Avalanche, you can actually program in if they get shares or revenue, like basically claims on the volume, right? So there's a lot more interesting stuff you can do, whereas you don't really have that flexibility. And I think you saw DYDX is like, okay, so I think those are pretty interesting trade-offs. I think a negative trade-off that can be challenging is liquidity. If you were to launch a DeFi protocol, let's say on like Solana, well, they don't have the best liquidity, but like, let's say you were to launch on like Ethereum layer 1, you have access to all that liquidity. So it's very easy for you to get people to come and deposit money. Whereas if you're on a subnet, it's a little bit harder because there's not native liquidity there. I mean, you can tap in. We're working on, that's what Teleporter will do, where if you deploy a subnet, you can just tap into C-chain liquidity. So it's not, the friction to onboarding isn't as tough. But I would say that can always be an issue, right? It's like, how do you get liquidity to your environment? And so there, there's obviously those, I would say those are kind of the big trade-offs that I see.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in this world where you are able to, and I'm not too familiar with Teleporter, I'll put it on my list to go look into after this. But in a world where there is a little bit more interoperability and less friction between subnets, how does security work? Right? Like,
you're asking the shared security question.
Yeah, the shared security question, basically. Yeah.
So I think this gets more I do NFTs and pictures, so
yeah.
with me here,
Sorry,
I might completely botch
I like to
this.
dive deep sometimes.
I'm going to make that statement right now because if this ends up somewhere and they're like, this guy said it, I don't know. I'm not technical enough to make bold claims on behalf of Avalanche. I'm speaking as myself. A lot of this may be incorrect. I want to put that up there right now. But I think the difference is from my conversation is in Ethereum, shared security is forced. So there's no optionality. In Avalanche, it's optional. You can inherit security from the C chain if you want, but you also don't have to, I think is the right answer.
Cool. Yeah, we can leave it at that. It's cool.
Yeah, we'll leave it there.
Yeah. Sweet. Cool. Yeah, I think Chris has some more questions. We can dive into some of the things.
Thanks for answering those questions, by the way. I know that sometimes they can lead to some really deep rabbit holes. And I just want to say Teleprompter, Warp Messenger, awesome technologies from the AVAX team. I'm excited to see where that goes with respect to subnets and how they work.
Little plug for the team. The person who's, our lead engineer, Patrick,
commune of people who support each other. A lot of independent artists have launched on Avalanche, and I know you've seen a lot of this. So I wanted to kind of talk about is it Avalanche? Was that the product you were talking about earlier? The program with the house residency type of stuff. I wanted to kind of dive into that for a quick second, just to be respectful of your time and kind of get an idea on what was the goal of that whole program. Obviously, having a whole bunch of artists apply to get residency, and get mentorship from really famous NFT artistry, and how you felt that's gone, goals, outcomes, that type of thing.
Yeah. So this goes back to my original statement. Or my initial statements was around like, what were the goals, right? So back in June or July of 2022, I started, and it was all about like wanting to get brand partnerships with NFTs, and a lot of people were doing like brand deals. So that was like the push, right? And so we had to say, okay, like how do I best envision brands entering the NFT space? And so what we kind of came to the idea was, and this is how we see it usually work, is you might have a really great brand like a Hallmark or a Toys R Us or one of these. Toys R Us doesn't exist anymore, but one of these like brands that are iconic that people know. And if they want to enter new markets, it can be tough for them, right? They maybe are, like when you think about Hallmark, they the market they own, but like let's say they want to get into a new market, or a new emerging market, it can be tough. So what they usually do, and what we've seen play out over time, is they have brand guidelines, whether it's like these are the colors, these are the fonts, these are the things we're okay with. But they usually partner with creatives that are in the emerging market and they let them put a spin on their brand that makes sense, so they can become familiar with that emerging market, right? You've seen Adidas has done it, Nike has done it with certain verticals that they enter. They do some unique things, and it's kind of the way it goes. And so we thought, like, hey, look, if that's the case, we should really focus on getting a lot of artists and creatives here that understand how to like make things cool in Web3 that people like, but will also be able to work with brands, right? So the second question was like, okay, if I'm a brand, I'm a Hallmark, am I going to put my brand image on a PFP collection where the founder's 24 years old and he drinks out of a shoe? Probably not. Very high risk, right? It's very high risk to do that. What low risk is if you haven't, just in general, right? So like what is low risk is an artist or a creative who maybe has a following, who has like a community that purchases their work, like those are relatively lower risks for me to put my brand on, right? So like that's the bet we made. What we saw play out was relatively true, right? I think Adidas has done a really good job of this. If you look at some of their activations at recent NFT events where they do like Adidas X artists and they do like a one-of-one piece, and they kind of like, so they did one with Fuocious too in the form of shoes. They were going to some things that worked out there on him individually. Tiffany's did this also where they partnered with CryptoPunks, which I would argue is more art than a PFP anyways. And so you kind of saw this play out. So that was the focus. And we partnered with a lot of mentors, and we brought that to market. Also, in June or July of 2022, to really gain tangible market share in PFPs was very expensive in terms of like a spend and incentive structure. The market was way more liquid and way more saturated. And so, the spend to market share gain was, in my opinion, too high. So I said, like, hey, like we'll work on that market later, but like if this is what we want and these are the goals. So like I said, then in February, goals change. Okay, we want volume. All right, well, now we got to change. So I think it was really good for what it did. It kept us in the conversation. We got a really good like stable of artists that are now actually working on projects and working on like new launch projects to help do the art for the PFPs or whatever it may be. So it was a good like signal for us and a good way for us to stay in the market without spending a ton of money. So, and then recently it was like, okay, well, around like September, maybe early October, the PFP market had kind of bottomed, and to gain market share and mind share was going to be much easier. So around February, March, we started to putting together the next incentive program, and we staggered these appropriately, and we launched a trading incentive program on one of the platforms on Avalanche. So, you can basically trade, you earn points, those points are redeemable, and then they give you Avalanche token. I think the last one was a 50,000 AVAX claim. So at the time, it was like a little over $1 million in a 4-week window. And the next one's coming up. Yeah. And the next one's coming up January 4th. So that was part of my job. It's like, okay, well, now we have to design an incentive structure. We have to put incentives around it. We have to get projects. So Dokyo is one of the projects that's doing really, really well. I think it minted at like 8 or 10 AVAX, and AVAX was like $8. And I think it's sitting at like 40 AVAX, and now AVAX is like $40. So people have done pretty well. Yeah, even if you just bought the AVAX, you did well. So that's been now much better received. Like our volumes are doing better, and they're trending better, and we just started it. So it'll be very interesting to see as that continues. But more so, what I think is unique about NFTs in general, and why I'm excited for this, is the user is drastically different than DeFi, right? And what I mean by that is, like, I'm a good DeFi user and I have a strategy and I'm getting yield on it, I'm incentivized to not tell a soul. The moment I tell any of you how I'm getting yield, you're going to copy me, and I'm going to get less yield, right? Like, I don't want to tell you how I'm getting yield. It's not in my best interest usually. Whereas on the other side for NFTs, in order for me to make money, I need to tell everyone how amazing my thing is, so you come and buy it. So, so it's a little more lone wolf versus community. We tend to see DeFi users are a little more lone wolf. They're tighter circles. They're not as public. Whereas NFTs are the opposite. The communities are much larger and they're much more vibrant in terms of like talking. And what it does is it actually creates a very unique identity and a very strong user retention. I'd argue that's one of Solana's biggest strengths, is how strong this NFT ecosystem was and how many users it retained. And so I think when we do incentive programs through NFTs, they hit better. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't know what people's average vet size here is, but some capital allocators, their average bet size is 5 million. They're not going to do anything unless they can buy $5 million worth of something. That's the minimum. Those are like the most sophisticated actors. And so you see them often in DeFi because there's really deep liquidity. They can't play in NFTs. The assets are too illiquid. You couldn't deploy $5 million into NFTs because you couldn't sell them. There's no way to instantly sell. So the illiquidity of the asset prevents certain people from participating. But what it encourages are really just average everyday users. So when we do incentives, they're much better like targeted. Like I know they're going to people that are just like Avalanche users and not people who are just coming here to extract yield and leave. And so I think the flywheel of that is really strong because like even when we did our first airdrop, we got to look through the data and like over 80% of that capital stayed, whether it bought new NFTs, whether it put stuff in GoGo Pool, whether it bought meme coins, it doesn't matter. It's incentivizing liquidity in the ecosystem. And so I think they're very unique assets in that way. And until liquidity gets deeper, it's always going to be really hard for someone with a lot of money to play. It just is because there's not enough money to get in and out. So yeah, that's where we're at now.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. I did want to kind of get, and I'll probably talk with you offline on getting like, for anyone who's interested in NFTs, we have quite a few that are, talking about what you're doing with hyperspace, and other NFT market space. Obviously, Joe Pegs, coming from the team there, Salvor, Campfire, any of the others that are major, players in the space, and seeing how at least the utility of it has evolved over the last 12 months has been interesting. As obviously, as you mentioned, there's been a bit of a bottoming out, at least on the NFT scene in AVAX. So what I did want to kind of move towards is, now that, we've been talking about being in the beginning of a structural market, what should we be looking forward to on Avalanche with regards to projects you're excited about, things that, DeFi users should be looking at to Avalanche? I know that RWAs, liquid staking, and GameFi are in Avalanche's conversations. Yeah,
I'll just go through every vertical because I get to talk to them every day. So let's start with gaming. I think gaming's done a really good job. It's very, very hot right now. A lot of people are paying attention to it. They have Shrapnel coming out. They have Gunzilla coming out hopefully soon, and a lot of other really great games. So I think that's really exciting to look at. I don't know if any of you have kids in the audience, but if your kids play games, there's ways they could play games, get items in games. Those items are then transactable for actual money. So it's a very interesting paradigm shift in terms of like how we view assets, right? If any of you have kids that play Fortnite or Apex or any of these games, and they always ask you, can I get a Fortnite card so I can buy this skin? I'm sure some parents, if you have kids, have had that question. Well, Fortnite owns those skins. So there's no ownership for you. As Roblox is another one. Yeah, there's no ownership. Roblox owns those assets. If they don't like you, they delete your account and you lose access to all those assets. So, well, gaming is different, right? Because as a form of an NFT, I actually own the asset. So I have ownership and I get upside growth, right? And a lot of people have these conversations about like World of Warcraft. If you could own those original items, what would they be worth? You see a really great market for this evolving in things like Counter-Strike Go. If you look at Counter-Strike Go skin markets, some of these things go for $50, $60, $80, $100,000 because people have invested and they own the upside. So I would say Counter-Strike Go almost now is like a game and a market. Like, you can never play the game, but you can actively just trade the market. And that's what a lot of people do, and they make money doing it. So I would say that's an interesting narrative. I want to see how this starts to evolve. For NFTs, right? We have our incentive program. We have a few projects on there that are doing and trending very well. So it'll be interesting to watch, like as people start to pick up on that, like, oh, I can actually just trade this market, and if I trade it profitably, even if I trade it negatively, there's money involved in this, and I get Avalanche tokens airdropped. For DeFi, they have Hubble launching, which is the first really real like Avalanche native perps protocol. So I think that launched today. I'm interested to see how that goes. They have GoGo Pool and a few other products that'll be launching soon. For institutional, if you saw, Morgan had that really great announcement on Spruce not too long ago with those large banks. I can't remember the names of them, and I don't want to say a bank that's not actually on it. So, but it's one of those banks, if you remember the Spruce announcement, which was really awesome. And
you said JP Morgan?
Side, yeah, that one.
The one that hates crypto?
No. I don't know.
We talked about it on Wednesday.
I'm not commenting on Jamie.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
And then the last one being on the technical side. So I'm really excited to see things like Avalanche Warp messaging evolve. I'm really excited to see things like Teleporter come to market. I'm excited to see some of the subnets we have launched coming up and being launched. TSM is launching a subnet. Some other games and other protocols are launching subnets. And I really think that, like I mentioned, that's like 4 months away, in my opinion, where that tech is just turns. And then we should see a much like increased interest in the ability to develop subnets. So I think on the tech side, those and also Firewood, if you saw the DB optimization and Hyper SDK. So those are some of the like things to look into on the technical side that are always interesting. I think I did the best wrap up and roundup I possibly could.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks for all that. That's a lot to look forward to. So I appreciate you dropping some nuggets there for us. I'll ask this question to kind of round it out. Again, being respectful of your time, and then I'll see if Jingle has another question or two. What do you think Avalanche is going to be doing to be the best position moving forward in this bull market cycle?
What do you think we have to do narrative wise to be in the best position?
Yeah.
My gut tells me we need to own that bucket of horizontal scaling in app chains, and that it's okay that we're not Solana. It's okay that we're not Ethereum. They're doing a different approach, but we own this bucket. We think this is the best reason why blockchains scale, and it's okay. Like I think that approach and being in that mental state of like, it's not all or nothing markets. Solana is doing something cool and unique. Ethereum is doing something cool and unique. We're doing something cool and unique, and we're in this lane and we own this lane. I think that'll be Avalanche's. But that's my personal feeling. Again, not speaking on behalf of Avalanche. I'm sure the marketing team is going to kill me and they have something that they're concocting up. But my gut tells me, as like just as a user, that's how I feel. I feel like there's 3 unique approaches, and we need to own one of those unique approaches.
Awesome. Jangle, any other questions you want to ask, sir?
No, I think we're at the hour, so that's it. Thanks so much, Dominic, for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here and teaching us some stuff and giving us a whole bunch of alpha. And I've got a whole bunch of homework for the weekend to get up to speed on everything happening in the Avalanche and Subnet ecosystems.
Yeah,
Dominic,
well,
I do have some questions. That some people have asked that, kind of outside the scope of what we were talking about. So I'll save them to have you answer them so we can get those answers later. So for anybody who's in our mastermind for the circle, post if you happened, or even on Beat the Banks, our free community, if you happen to have a question that you'd want to see an answer from Dominic, feel free to respond to any of the posts that we put out there. We'll gather them and get the answers for you. But again, thank you, Dominic, for joining us. Thank you so much. This has been a months in the making Q&A to put together. So thank you for taking the time. Love to see everything that's been going on. Much continued success to you and your team and your career at Ava Labs. Anything you want to plug? Feel free to go ahead.
No, I mean, I feel like I gave it all in the weekly, or I gave it all in the wrap up there. I would say, even though I work at Avalanche, the one piece of advice I can give anyone who's exploring crypto, and this is just from my personal experience and the way I've done the best, performed the best, and had the most fun, is like you should always be curious. And the moment you stop becoming curious, it's not a good thing. So it doesn't matter whether it's curious on Avalanche, it doesn't matter if it's curious on other chains. Just try to stay as like curious as possible. Try to always be like learning and pushing yourself. I think getting comfortable in crypto can be very easy. But I think the opportunity in this space is so great that if you just stay curious and try things and just, keep that side of your brain turned on, because you never really know what's going to happen here. I think that's the best advice I always give people, is just be curious, and don't keep your coins on exchanges. Keep them in a cold storage wallet that you hold. Those are the 2 pieces of advice. Keep them on a cold storage wallet and stay curious.
Things that we love to preach here at Beacon. Awesome. Well, to everybody in the audience, thanks for joining us today. Deep dive into DeFi for Mastermind folks later on. Beat the Banks training with me at 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for being here, Dominic.
Thanks, everybody.
Excited to have you back on
Have
for
a nice
more
weekend.
stuff. 07, everyone.
You too.
Have a good day.